and get this party started. Again, good afternoon and welcome to another ACUMA Fast Track webinar. For those who don't know, my name is Peter Benjamin, and I couldn't be more excited to moderate today's session. On tap today, we have two of our favorite resident experts, and they'll share some thoughts on probably one of my favorite topics of the year, really the election's impact on housing. Now, before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be posted to our website in the coming days. Now, next up, I will be monitoring the Q&A. Feel free to ask questions along the way, and I'll do my best to weave them into the conversation. Next, now for us, over here at ACUMA, I must say, this year has already been better than we could have ever imagined. Our first event was held in Phoenix. It was fantastic. It was awesome. Our next event is our first of two focal point workshops. Now that's taking place in just under a month. So if you miss Phoenix, I'm sorry, but you're not going to want to miss this event. Now, as a quick reminder, our May workshop is being held in Nashville, Tennessee, Nash Vegas if you're fancy, and June's will be in Denver, Colorado. There's still time to register for both. We really hope to see you at one of the upcoming events. And finally, before we start getting this show on the road, a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed during this webinar do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of ACUMA, its board of directors, its management staff, or its members. The webinar and its materials are presented as a set of ideas and possible strategies regarding its specific topic and do not represent any endorsements of either of the presenters, their firms, or the concepts they present. Okay, let's dive in. Today's webinar is being brought to you by SilverWorks Solutions. Joining us today is the CEO of SilverWorks Solutions, Michael Kaysen. Michael, why don't you come on stage? Welcome. Thanks for being here, and it is very good to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you? Good to see you, Peter.
Awesome. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you very much for asking.
Good.
Michael, I'm excited to talk to you. So I feel like, SilverWorks Solutions provides. Let me take a step back, and I'm sorry. AI has been a conversation that we've had on several occasions with our subject matter experts that I'll introduce in just a short bit. But the conversation around AI has been a pretty popular topic at on different webinars, but also at really our in-person event, recently in Phoenix, and it's going to be part of the conversation coming up in Nashville and Denver. Now, in general, that idea of mortgage modernization and AI, I love those topics. So here's really the question. I understand that that SilverWorks Solutions is really focused on this, the idea of mortgage modernization and AI. For those that do not know, since you're a relatively new member to ACUMA, tell us more about SilverWorks and how you try to stand out in that mortgage technology space.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to. So, as you said, we're a mortgage automation firm. We provide a suite of role-based, or we call them persona-based bots that align with the major roles that you find in mortgage origination. As a company, we've been around 8 years now. We were, if you rewind the tape, these were very new topics, if even on the radar screen in credit unions in the mortgage space 8 years ago. So we really kind of pioneered this space. And, our goal as a company is to help the industry realize the full potential of this kind of technology. We think that it's amazing stuff, and it's come a long way in 8 years, and we think that the best is yet to come. It still has a long way to go. So how do we stand out? I think it's our product set. As I mentioned, our products are organized around these roles. I think that makes it very intuitive for credit unions and lenders to kind of understand our product set. So much mortgage tech nowadays is designed by technologists, but we're mortgage people, and so we try to make it intuitive and easy for mortgage people to understand. That also makes it easier to implement, right? Because a thing that kind of kills a lot of major tech initiatives is not necessarily the tech, but sometimes the people dimension or the change management. And so, having that human persona and revolving the product around the role makes it easier to train people and easier to implement the technology. So I think those are kind of the key ways for us that we differentiate ourselves and try to stand out.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on something. Literally just last week, I was speaking to a group of credit unions about some of the tactics we as credit unions really need to take to come out of whatever this current market is ahead, right? And one of the things was modernize. Credit unions historically just seem to always be one or two steps behind the rest, right? So from your perspective, I kind of just shared my thoughts a little bit, but from your perspective, why is it so important for credit unions to modernize? And I guess second part of that would be the general benefits of partnering with an organization like Silverwork Solutions.
Right. No, great question. So, I think that mortgage tech is advancing at a clip that is more rapid than it used to be. So I think it's important for all lenders, whether it's credit unions or other categories, to keep pace with the modernization. For us, the exciting thing about credit unions modernizing is what it can do for the borrower experience, for the member experience. I know that's super important to credit unions, but the kind of digital labor that's available nowadays can do some really amazing things with the member experience in terms of the service levels, the availability of certain functions, the availability to get pre-approvals, disclosures, every step in the loan manufacturing process, the tremendous improvement in availability. And then also, loan quality, things can be more reliable and done to a higher quality with what we call digital labor versus manual labor. So the ability for credit unions to kind of reimagine that experience is the part that we're really excited about.
I love it. And I love how you also frame it up as mortgage automation, right? That efficiency, that additional efficiency, that additional automation relates or translates to an improved member experience, right? So, thinking of mortgage automation, I love that term that you used. What are some of the key considerations for credit unions when selecting automation products and services? Because again, it's still very much a new technology, right?
Right. No, absolutely. So the considerations that we would highlight would probably be kind of three main areas. One is ease of implementation. As I said, that you need a project to be successful. Within the credit union, within the members, within the broader credit union as well, in terms of is mortgage synergistic with the other products provided within the credit union. So that comes back to is it easy to understand? Is it easy to implement? Another part of that is benefit realization. That's a hot topic in the industry now. There's a lot of mortgage tech out there that's available. A lot of credit unions, other lenders have procured some of that over the years, and now they're wondering what's the ROI. So understanding the ROI that you wanted out of the technology, and how you can measure it. And that's one of the reasons, again, that we have this persona-based approach, because credit union lenders would understand what their cost structure is for closing, for underwriting, et cetera, and our product set is oriented along those boundaries, so that the comparison is pretty obvious. And then the last consideration, again, is enabling the credit union value proposition to the members. Like what is your goals there, and is the technology, the automation, an enabler of that? And in what ways is it an enabler?
Okay, I love it. Part of that is part of this whole process is really a credit union sitting down and understanding their digital strategy, right? How do they get from point A to point B? To my understanding, you guys can help them with that process, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so kind of walk us through that. How can civil work help?
So we help on two fronts, from a people dimension, our personnel, and then a product. So on the people side, I like to say, we provide this automation, this role-based automation. That's our product set. But when we're configuring and training the bots to be put in a credit union's lending organization, our personnel are kind of like free consultants. As I mentioned, we were pioneers in this space. We know a lot about digital mortgage, and have walked the halls of a lot of different customers. And so there's a lot of value we can bring from a people dimension. And I said we don't really charge for that. That's just kind of the best practices that our personnel bring along in the bargain. And then on the product side, our product set is purpose built to the mortgage space, and there's a lot of best practices embedded in the product. And so credit unions will look at the templates and the way the bots operate off the shelf, so to speak. And a lot of times the credit unions will say, hey, that's a great idea. We should just do it that way. And so we pull through a lot of best practices, intrinsic in the product set. And our customers really appreciate that. There's no need to reinvent the wheel a lot of times. And, it just helps them get some good ideas. And then they could obviously customize it and, personalize it to be their own from there. But we're definitely not starting with a blank sheet of paper.
Fantastic. Okay, final question.
Yep.
Then I'm gonna let you go. Now, I would be, betraying our attendees and letting them down if we didn't get your thoughts on how AI and mortgage automation might be impacted from your perspective, how AI might be impacted or changed due to the election.
Wow, AI and politics.
I threw a curveball at you. And I'm sorry about the curveball, but I had to do it. I had to do it.
Yeah, no, it's a timely question, and I'm sure your upcoming guest can unpack it more than I can. But we track those kind of things, and AI is a rare thing in DC nowadays because it's a rare topic that has bipartisan support. Both parties agree that the government needs to do something in terms of AI governance and guardrails and enabling AI as well. And so that's a rare thing. I think also the thing that might be counterintuitive to some people is that I think that the government can actually help in these areas because there's a lot of precedents for that. Things like the internet itself, GPS technology, like the Human Genome Project. I mean, all of those things had government backing and enablement in the early years. And so it's not like the government can't really help with AI. So, but in terms of like the election and like which way it's going to break, in that regard, then probably a little harder to predict. Like
no. I'm not gonna make you. I'm not gonna force you.
Yeah. My crystal ball's broken on that front, but yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you again. I truly appreciate your time today, and thank you for sponsoring today's session.
No, you're welcome. We're excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. As I mentioned, today's session focuses on the election. Today's speakers are DC experts and have become regular speakers at our events and are featured on ACUMA's On Point podcast policy series. I am pleased to welcome our two very special guests from Brownstein, Zach Pfister, Policy Director, and Leah Dempsey, Shareholder. Zach and Leah, welcome and come on stage. All right, Zach, Leah, it's good to see you.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. It's my pleasure. Now, Zach, Leah, this has obviously been one of my favorite topics, and it couldn't be better positioned for this time of the year. Now, there's so much happening in DC, and all of which could easily be tied back to the election. I know we normally really focus on specific policies, but today we're going to change things up a bit. Let's share with the group some insight on how the election could potentially impact the housing industry, and of course, several of the policies we have discussed. Whether it's on our podcast or Zach, you were down in Phoenix with us. So let's really dive into that. Now, I know this is a big topic, and I have a lot of questions. So if it's okay with you guys, we'll jump right in. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Fantastic. All right. So it doesn't matter who answers it. You both can tag team it, but let's start off. I like the idea of starting off with, painting a picture for the audience, painting a picture for our attendees on the current state of play. As part of this, please include the transition and potential changes in Congress, if you could. So Zach, Leah, it's up to you. You guys jump in.
Sure. I'm happy to jump in first. I think it's important to kind of paint a picture of the actual the landscape we're staring down as we look towards the election. You've heard me say this before, Peter, but this Congress is unique in many ways. By almost every historical metric, it is the tightest margin for a majority party that's practically possible. You have the House controlled by Republicans with at the current time a one vote majority, meaning that they can only lose one of their members on any bill they put on the floor if they aren't going to rely on Democratic votes. And in the Senate, it's flipped. You have a 51-49 majority held by the Democrats. By any metric, House, Senate, and the race for the White House are all considered toss-up races at this point. Trump and Biden are the nominees. Both carry very heavy unfavorable ratings in the polls. The House is, as I mentioned, is virtually paralyzed given its slim margins. It has some family issues internally in both parties, but it matters more in the majority party at the moment because they control what moves on the floor. So Democrats see an opportunity there in the House. There are 17 districts in which the president won the district in 2020, but it is currently occupied by a Republican. So in terms of the House, that is where the Democrats will focus on taking back a majority of those seats and subsequently the House majority. The script is flipped in the Senate. 1 seat margin there. The Democrats have to defend some really tough territory. They have seats currently occupying West Virginia, Montana, Ohio, all states that President Trump won twice. And then they also have to defend key swing states in Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, where both President Trump and Biden have a history of victory. For all intents and purposes, the Democrats need to sweep every seat that they currently occupy, with the exception of West Virginia, because it's already been written off. And best case scenario for them at this point is a 50-50 split with a VP tie-breaking vote, on any consequential vote in that next Congress. I would argue at this point in time, the odds are generally about the same of a Republican takeover of the Senate and a Democratic takeover of the House, with a coin toss on Biden versus Trump, with a couple outside factors that we can dive into later, but there is a well-known name that may or may not appear on some key ballots in some key states. You never know whenever you have a Kennedy on the ballot what type of impact that's going to have. This Kennedy in particular, may well draw votes from both sides. There is some bending of the political arc, but in terms of a spoiler / kingmaker effect, a candidate like RFK Jr. running as an independent, if he shows up on the ballots or secures ballot access in a specific number of which will decide this election, he may be the most consequential third-party candidate to impact an election since Ross Perot in 1992. Right now, he's polling not as high as Perot did, but he is polling higher than any independent third-party candidate has done so in recent memory. And of all elections, this is one where probably could make the most impact because the polls are so tight.
Okay.
I'll stop there. I'll pitch it over to Leah.
Leah, please.
Well, I'll just start out with the current environment. I think everything Zach said is totally correct. The other interesting element of that is because of the gridlock in Congress and the election politics, we're also seeing some strange things out of the agencies and out of the White House that I would argue is also not reminiscent of anything I've seen in the last 15 years in DC, where the White House is putting out very specific press releases about housing issues and, very nuanced consumer protection issues, things like the State of the Union, where we saw the president wade into very specific nuanced housing issues. In the past, a lot of that, dialogue and discussion was left to Congress or left to the administrative process at the agencies, where people were filing comprehensive comments supported by research and data to make decisions on some of those items. And right now, because of the election year, because of the fact that Congress can't get anything done, we're seeing things getting done in somewhat strange ways through press releases, through executive orders. I would point to one example of the student loan forgiveness issue, where the Supreme Court has already ruled on this, and now the president is bringing it back up again for a second time and trying to take a second or third run at that issue through the agencies. Just a lot of strange stuff happening, and you really just need to be on your toes to see what's coming next in the housing space.
Okay. So a lot's happening, right? So Liam, I'm gonna kick this next question over to you. A lot's happening, and you're right. Biden kind of outlined his plan, in the State of the Union, right? And I wish I could frame this up in some clever analogy, like Biden versus Trump is like Balboa versus Mr. T or something like that. I couldn't think of something good, right? So let's dive into that. Let's dive into the housing issues from both sides. On the surface, it seems as though Biden's really focused on affordability, right? Well, I'll use that as a blanket term, affordability, and really the quality in housing, right, on the surface. Trump, on the other hand, really seems to be focused on really just lowering interest rates and building more, right? There has to be more to that, though. There has to be more to both sides and really their stances on housing. Leah, can you speak to that?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think both sides are probably well-intentioned, but go about this at different ways. Obviously, the Biden administration has taken a very heavy hand to regulations. We've seen, every agency very active right now. The FHFA, HUD, CFPB, all of them right now have major potential rulemakings that are going to be impacting the housing industry. For example, the FHFA has this proposal on fair lending hanging out there. We have all these different proposals on junk fees, one at the FTC that has a huge housing component. And the Biden administration, in their mind, in their calculus, they think that's part of creating more affordable housing. When Trump was the president before, I think we saw more of a hands-off approach, particularly at the CFPB when the Republicans were in control. They, rather than having more prescriptive requirements, did things like defining UDAP in a more narrow definition so that it wasn't as broadly defined and there wasn't as much regulatory space to create rules or go after people in enforcement activity under UDAP. They also prioritize something called the regulatory sandbox, where they really encourage different groups and industries to come to the CFPB with ideas, and this whole kind of petition process to get sign off from the CFPB that was aimed at innovation. So really two different approaches to creating more affordable housing. Whether one or the other was more successful, I don't know that we have all the facts and all the details on that. I'm sure we could hear both sides of that debate, but I do think that if President Trump wins again, we will see some of what has been being proposed rolled back over time. And Zach and I'm sure we'll get into that more, but there's some pretty specific deadlines on some of those things in an election year, including the Congressional Review Act, which allows Congress to strike down regulations from a prior administration if they want to. And that deadline is coming up in just a few months, probably sometime around June, because it's technically 60 legislative days before the new president is signed in. But because Congress takes off for the whole month of August, and this year I think they're taking off almost the whole month of October as well to go campaign, 60 legislative days really ends up being almost 6 months. They also take off most Monday and Fridays. And I shouldn't say take off. They are not in session those days. But so that time frame, that clock starts ticking in June. So that is one reason we're seeing a huge push right now to get a lot of these rules finalized. But there's other ways to make changes as well. And I don't know if Zach wants to talk about some of those.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about the possible pending rule changes, in a little bit. But Zach, coming back to the idea, just on the surface, affordability, lower interest rates. What are your thoughts on how they're approaching this, on how they're approaching housing issues?
Well, I want to go back to your first point on generally on interest rates. It's a good thing to point out. There is no question that, I mean, we have seen this if past is prologue, that President Trump did not hesitate to apply overt pressure to the Fed when he was not favorable towards the interest rate at the time. I don't see President Biden taking that approach, but if in the event that Trump was reelected, if rates don't come down, in the second half of this year as anticipated, but now people are getting, it sounds like the analysts are getting a little wobbly about those predictions. I would assume absolutely Trump would, publicly, call on the Fed to lower rates and try that messaging campaign. But, Biden, I would kind of break it down into a couple categories here. He's really placed in his first term, he's really placed an emphasis on consumer protection, first-time homeownership, rental affordability. Some of his critics, I guess, with respect to the proposals that have been kind of flooding out the doors, especially in the last 6 months, State of the Union, President's budget. There's a lot that focuses on the demand side, and I think some of his critics are arguing that we don't have a demand issue, we have a supply issue. There are a lot of proposals out there for incentives for first-time home ownership, first-generation home ownership. He's proposed a temporary $400 tax credit per month for first-time home buyers, down payment assistance ranging from $10,000 for a first-time home buyer to $25,000 for a first-generation first-time home buyer, and some could argue that, like, in certain markets these incentives might not even be necessary. It's more that it's that initial that current market with rates where they are, are serving as an inhibitor to some of this buying. But a lot of focus is also on the fact that there's a supply issue that can't be addressed overnight, right? And his proposals, as outlined in his budget, as outlined in the State of the Union, they do have an emphasis on the supply side of the equation. They are, in a way, a little more decentralized, in which the funding he's proposing would be more evenly distributed into states and localities, and then in turn, kind of put out there into the market via grants to local housing authorities, multifamily, et cetera. And that is a way to, I guess, in their view, more equitably kind of diffuse that investment. But it adds layers and it takes time, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. President Trump's a builder, right? We could see him coming in and focusing on deregulation and building more homes. And we do have a big vehicle potentially coming up next Congress, regardless of who's in the White House or who's in charge of Congress. One way or the other, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the more better known as the Trump tax cuts, the majority of them expire next year. And so that puts everything on the table. LIHTC, mortgage interest deduction, SALT, which includes property taxes, any new proposals on incentivization for home building, any tax credits for first-time home ownership. And it will end up being a kind of a bonanza, a tax bonanza for all industry sectors. But with housing so front and center, now in both parties, I think there's a lot of potential opportunity there, along with some defense that will need to be taken as well on some proposals. But it's going to be an interesting year next year, regardless of who takes the White House.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much. So next question. So regardless of who wins, someone is being reelected, right? That's the obvious, right? Whether it's a Biden reelect versus a Trump non-consecutive term reelection. Now, so how will this either reelection change things with regards to the policy? This is the really meat and potatoes of the webinar. How will this change the policies that we're currently facing in housing, right? So first up, let's start with the people that could potentially be impacted with we'll say a change in the administration from Democrat to Republican. What roles could potentially be impacted in DC?
Well, role-wise, as in agency heads, cabinet officials, if President Biden is reelected to a second term, there is traditional turnover. There's kind of this age-old practice that the first meeting that the president has after being sworn in for a second term is the meeting with his cabinet, where he asks all of them for their resignation. That way, he's not, the onus isn't on him to hold someone over or fire someone. Everybody tenders their resignation, and then he, or she would in turn decide who to keep. And that's more of a formality practice. But the truth of the matter is that in a second presidential term, there's a lot of turnover. The higher the position, the more the turnover. So we should expect to see, a new face at HUD.
Just out of curiosity, sorry to interrupt you. Any hints as to who that possibly could be?
Well, I mean, the current front and center guess, I would still put this in the conjecture category, is Adrian Todman, who's the current deputy secretary and now acting secretary. She will be before the Senate Banking Committee later next week. for a hearing with Director Thompson. And I think a lot of folks are maybe looking at that as kind of an audition. It is we're told that it is the president's intention to make a nomination for the permanent position this year still. But I think everybody's managing expectations about, just because an individual is nominated does not necessarily mean an individual will be confirmed in this type of political environment in an election year with a 51-49 Senate. But Todman would be a logical choice because she's already been confirmed and she's already been through the vetting process and the confirmation hearings. So if there was anyone to be able to make the cut still this year, it would probably be a candidate like her. But that's kind of the name that's being floated currently, but there will no doubt be others throughout the process as well. But that's an example. Yeah.
Right. And for our attendees, we're having this conversation because obviously Fudge stepped down, right?
Right.
So obviously that HUD position is vacant. And you feel confident that HUD position will be filled permanently, not just on a temporary basis or acting basis before the end of the year, possibly.
I'm less confident on it than maybe some. I just if you just keep looking back at the way these tight votes have gone, it only takes one Democratic defection to prevent a nominee at this point. We've seen some judges go down. We've seen some nominations pulled from an FCC commissioner to a Department of Labor head. And so there's just not a lot of track record, because the interesting thing about Biden's cabinet is that they've been remarkably stable, right? Like, there has not been near the turnover in this cabinet as there is traditionally in a first term. The vast majority of them are still the ones who took office, on day one, which is pretty incredible. So there's just a lot of animosity on Capitol Hill, and even an easy, up or down vote in a normal circumstance may prove, challenging just in this political environment. But one way or the other, there will be a permanent HUD secretary at some point between now and this time next year. I'll take that bet.
That's probably a good bet. Now, Leah, coming to you, let's focus on agency, right? What roles within the agency, could we again, thinking about housing, thinking about credit union mortgage lenders, what roles in the agencies will we definitely see a change?
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about a potential Trump administration. And similar to what Zach said, another tradition with the new president is almost immediately they freeze every single rule that's in process. So if Trump takes over, probably day one or day two, there's an immediate freeze on everything, and they take some time to review what's going on. Agencies like the CFPB, where after post the Supreme Court decision in seal law, the CFPB director is also basically a cabinet position because they serve at the will of the president. He will, I'm sure, either Trump will either resign or be asked to resign, and will be gone within a few days, and there'll be a new nomination for a CFPB director. There's a lot of people that have thought about that position in the past under the Trump administration. I know that Todd Zawicki, who is a well-known professor in law and economics, who's kind of a free market guy, had gone through the process with Trump in the past. He's very interested in the position. I don't know if he would go back down that route, but there's also many people that are active in these issues on the Capitol Hill that might be considered. Last time, Brian Johnson, who was the deputy at the CFPB, came from Hensarling's administration, and a lot of the staff, the chief of staff, came from Hensarling's administration, who was the House Financial Services Republican chairman. So I think a lot of these agencies will look to Capitol Hill for some of the Republicans. Some of the names that we've heard out there as part of the election, people like Tim Scott and Byron Donalds, they both have financial services backgrounds. So, there may be a place for them at one of the agencies as we kind of look towards that. Not exactly sure, but we have a sense of the type of person that Trump hired in his last administration. And we know some of the people that are friendly with him. But I think there's also the possibility of some surprises. We also know that a lot has happened in the world of Trump since he was the president last time, and he's lost a lot of friends and burned some bridges with some former political appointees, many political appointees. A lot of the Secretary of Labor during one part of his administration, I think it ended pretty poorly. And I know the chief of staff of labor at one point was banned from the White House, and probably some other agencies as well. So there may also be some pretty new faces, and he may in some instances take a different approach and decide, he doesn't necessarily see himself as an establishment Republican. He doesn't necessarily align himself with all the Republicans on Capitol Hill. So I also wouldn't be extremely shocked if he doesn't look to, Patrick McHenry's staff this time and takes a new approach to hiring some of the positions on the Republican side.
Okay. So CFPB, I'm guessing FHFA, right?
Yeah, FHFA, of course, Mark Calabria was there before. He's been associated with Mike Pence, who is no longer in the great graces of Donald Trump, but I think Mark's pretty much stayed out of that and pretty much has indicated that he would be interested in a higher position at somewhere like Treasury, maybe in the future. So I think his, maybe someone like Mark or someone in his vortex for some of those positions. NCUA, we know that Kyle Hauptman will become the chair, and then another Republican would be elected to, or would be nominated for one of those other positions, which is also notable at the NCUA. Usually takes longer than the average position to fill because people like Rodney Hood, who held over for several months, they kind of sometimes put NCUA at the bottom of their list when they're filling those new appointments. So I would expect if there is a change in administration, we may not see another Republican at the NCUA for maybe even close to a year. Has kind of been what we've seen in the past.
Okay. So let's kind of dive into the rules. I mean, you both hinted at some point in time throughout this conversation, pending policies, pending rules that either could be delayed versus cut, right, from this change. Now, I want to add one more point to that, and we'll really dive into what policies or what rules you think could possibly be changed. But do you foresee any, we'll say, pre-Biden Trump administration rules that could make a comeback as part of housing? Leah, we'll start with you.
I think anything CFPB related. One thing I sort of mentioned before, the UDAP, where he had the more narrow definition that plays into a lot of the housing issues. I do think they would more narrowly define UDAP. Another point in the CFPB, they recently, about a year ago, put out some guidance telling the state AGs to build on and enforce consumer protection laws, really deputizing them to go further than even some of the federal statutes if they felt the need to do that. I think there would be a pulling back of that. So to the extent that state chartered credit unions are seeing any changes in their local consumer finance laws. I do think there would be some sort of guidance or some sort of note out to the AGs and the states to pull back on what they're doing. You know, will the blue states listen to that? Probably not. But I do see that a lot of the debates that are at the federal level right now may create some interesting new developments at the state level as well. And some of the state consumer protection laws will be implicated by that. This isn't directly mortgage related, but I know impacts credit unions overall. The DOL overtime and fiduciary rules, those have been in a political volley for the last two administrations, and it would be kind of crazy, but I think again they would be pulled back again and reproposed again for the third or fourth time. And I know that a lot of credit unions are following those as well.
Okay. Now, I guess one of our favorite conversations is LO comp. Now, right before Biden took office, you know, the Trump administration, the Captain Cranger CFPB proposed possible changes or hinted at agreeing to possible changes to LO comp. Foresee that coming back?
I think it would be on the list. I don't think it would be a top priority that they get to even in the first.
I mean, give me 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's on the list and they get to it, but they just because of what Chopra has done, it's going to take a lot of time to undo some of the more extreme things that have been done before they get to the more proactive measures that something like that. But I do think all of those things are back on the table, but probably the immediate time is spent, I would say plugging the holes of regulatory chaos. But I do think all of that will get to their to-do list as well.
Okay, so one of the things that's kind of sort of pending and set to roll out in 2025 is the new credit score model.
Mhm.
Will that be delayed? Will that be changed? What are your thoughts? Either of you, doesn't matter who. Zach, Leah.
I would actually, I wouldn't put that necessarily in the top tier for revoking in a Trump scenario, right? The thing to remember is like this is the Republican Party led by Trump has definitely moved into a more populist kind of stream of consciousness. They are not the default, universally business friendly party that they once were. And so, Trump there is only one Trump. He is unique. And he may look at that and say, that's a great idea, right? So I'm not necessarily convinced that would be a top tier choice of his, but also it may not be on his radar unless somebody puts it on his radar, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But Leah, I don't know if you agree or disagree. I'm just kind of looking at this from.
Yeah, Trump, I think his priorities are going to be the border, national security. Those are things he spends a lot of time talking about. He doesn't, and in his last administration really just did not get into the weeds of our type of issue, our housing issues and our consumer protection issues. So all of it, I think, is going to be driven by the people around him and who he ends up picking as his agency heads. If he picks an agency head at FHFA, someone that has some qualms about the credit score modeling, it could bump to the top of the list quickly, but Trump himself probably doesn't have a huge dog in the fight.
Okay, very good. Now, just for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward. So, I welcome your final thoughts from both of you. Zach, you already hinted at one possible surprise by the name of a Kennedy on the ballot. Any other possible surprises of this election? Could we see someone by the name of literally anyone else possibly win? And again, for those who don't know, there was a gentleman, I want to say Dallas, who changed his name to literally anybody else, and he's now running for president apparently. So any surprises, any final thoughts?
All I will say is that barring some factor that would prevent either of the main party nominees from serving, for example, a health condition or a legal condition, it will be Trump or Biden as president. I do think, though, that the real, story the day after the election, regardless of the victor, is going to be, what role RFK played. Keep in mind that in 2016, for the 6 months leading into the election, people just kind of stopped paying attention because Hillary Clinton was so obviously going to win. I was in that camp. So this is a bipartisan conversation here. I'm the Democrat, Leah's the Republican. I was in that camp. I was like, she's got this. And she lost by a cumulative, because of the way our election system works, a cumulative 6,000 or 7,000 votes across 3 states, right? Because we have the Electoral College. We also have the popular vote, but that isn't as meaningful when you have the Electoral College. So anything can happen. And I really think that if RFK continues to stay polling in this, 7 to 10% range, that if he's on the ballot in Arizona, or if he's on the ballot in, Nevada or Michigan, who knows what could happen there. I do think he siphons from both candidates. I do think that it seems that the Democrats are a little more concerned about him being on the ballot. He shares some policy positions with Trump. So, he could draw some people that wouldn't necessarily vote for any of the candidates, but because he's on the ballot, they'll come out. And it really creates some variables that the polling is not going to pick up, that, the folks on cable news are not going to pick up, but it's going to be a storyline after the day after the election. We just don't know what that story is going to say.
Okay, so moral of the story is don't sleep on Kennedy.
Don't sleep on Kennedy's ability to influence the election.
Okay, got it. Leah, final thoughts? Any surprises?
So, I would add that some of this litigation against Trump right now, personally, some of it, barring my feelings on Donald Trump, don't like to see activist judges getting involved in politics. And I think we are seeing some of that, but I would say on the other end of that spectrum, some of this litigation has some legitimate basis, and particularly this case in New York where Trump valued his property at a level that I don't know has ever happened in New York City before. We may see a ruling on that case sometime right around October, and would be perfect for an October surprise if, the court found him, guilty of some of these things or had some huge damages. So that, to me, that's the one unknown where there could be a little bit of a surprise. It's Trump. Knowing how he's reacted to these things in the past, I think he would find a way around it either way, but it is something to keep an eye on.
That's the real takeaway, Peter. Don't sleep on the October surprise.
Because they're over surprise.
That's
right.
Okay. Well put, Leah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, awesome. Thank you both for spending time with us today. We have to close out. Now, again, really appreciate all the insights that you provided to us and the attendees. And I look forward to catching up with both of you in a future ACUMA event.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely, guys. Once again, thank you to Michael Kaysen and Silverworks Solutions for sponsoring today's webinar, and again to Zach and Leah from Brown's team for their valuable insights. And just to close out, really to all of you, thank you for attending today's webinar. We understand your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending really the full hour with us today. We hope that you enjoyed today's session. We understand that an hour most certainly isn't nearly enough time to cover everything on this topic. So if you want to learn more and continue to fine-tune your knowledge, I would recommend attending one of our upcoming events or listening to one of our podcasts, where you'll find that we'll continue to expand on this topic and much, much more. Head over to www.acuma.org or our community page for more information on the latest updates on everything happening over at ACUMA. Until next time, be well, my friends.